Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Paul Fleming. He is a U.S. Navy man, 100% disabled veteran, best-selling author, historian, executive member of the Vet Force, the nation's largest veterans business organization. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Thank you, sir. It's great to be here.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about faith, healing, and storytelling. And before we come to the storytelling part, help us with a bit of about your story, Doug, so that people know who they are listening to.
Well, I'm a great storyteller, and I've got some stories to tell. All right.
Yes.
Catching attention every time I put a book out. It doesn't take long for it to become a bestseller. So, listen, my life was pretty rough. I had a rough upbringing. I was homeless and on my own at 14. When I finally left an extremely abusive childhood. And I went in the military at 17. That was another adventure. The Navy tried to kill me a couple times, but it didn't take. Now the VA is still trying to kill me with their brand of vet care. So it's been an interesting 6 decades. And I tell some pretty amazing stories in these books that I'm putting out there that's helping a lot of people, because a lot of the stuff that I talk about, very few people are talking about.
Right, Doug. So I want to understand, as a veteran, as a former U.S. Navy person, I want to understand what are the issues that, veterans face after they are out of the Navy. Why does the same people who talk about, unity, cohesiveness, they are not able to take care of people who were once a very special part of it? Why is it so? And it is leading to a lot of discord in every manner. Is it because of heartlessness, or is it that the system has been designed like that? Is it profiting a few people?
Yeah, that's a great series of questions to unpack. Right now in the U.S., the best statistical number shows that 50 veterans a day are committing suicide. Now, that leads to a couple thousand a day and family members that are suffering from each veteran or 50 veterans a day committing suicide. There's really no blame that I can pass on. This is something that's evolving, like a lot of things in life. At one point in time, certain conversations are taboo. You can't talk about them. Suicide and mental health is at that apex, if you will. It's just now starting to break out of the taboo topics, the things people cringe when they hear the word suicide or mental health. So there's a lot to the reasons behind the mental health crisis and veteran suicide. But one of the biggest parts is that veterans are taught, we're trained to not complain about anything. And we know that whatever we're facing, somebody else has it worse. So we tend to keep it to ourselves. And that's a critical part of why this path towards suicide is skyrocketing the way it is. It comes with not understanding what a veteran is and feeling the pride, not being willing to talk about trauma in your life, and then the transition from the military back to the civilian life is a critical factor in veterans' suicide. So I talk about all those topics in my most recent book, A Date with Suicide, and it gets into it. It really does call out a lot of things that few people are talking about.
Right. So if veterans, or as a army person, Navy person, if you are taught not to complain, that does not mean that you will not talk about issues that actually concern your life. And so that training has to be looked at in a very different manner. Why is it then, if people are not complaining, That does not mean that the services will not understand those issues and take actions about it. It's not one people, or it's a thousands of people. And as you said, the suicide number is 50 veterans a day. It is a huge number. So I want to understand then, what is the system doing? Why are they not alert to? Why they talk big? Why is it that politicians who are also, as the commander in chief, he is the president of the United States, why are they not aware of these issues? Is it deliberate, or is it that this is, this only the big talks about peace in other parts of the world and actually waging wars in different nations, and it is just the veterans or the army people or the navy people or the air force people, they are bearing the brunt of all this bravado by the politicians who have nothing to do on the ground.
Hey, we've got to hire you to do some campaigning on behalf of veterans. Man, you said that so perfectly, eloquently, I might add. But yeah, there is no leadership, and there hasn't been leadership on this subject. There have been a number of efforts. The big organizations like American Legion, I'm on their podcast coming up here in a couple of weeks, and they have the Be One or Be the One campaign, which is a hard effort in a good way to be talking about and exposing veteran suicide and making it commonplace. So, but the VA from the last 40 years that I've been plugged into that system, it's a nightmare. They don't have it under control. They don't have an overall plan, and it's just getting worse. So the federal government must stand up. And I've proposed legislation. Again, I spent 10 years in the heart of the United States, Washington, D.C., lobbying on behalf of VetForce to get entrepreneurship laws passed for veterans. And we were successful. We need to do the same thing, and we need to keep it simple with one simple attack plan, and that is any veteran who asks for help, any veteran who says, I need help, has immediate and instant access to any and all mental health facilities or personnel that they wish to go see outside of the VA or inside of the VA. And it needs to be 100% paid for by the U.S. government, the U.S. Veterans Administration, or whatever source it has to come from. But that's until we get some significant moves, whether it's an executive order or strict legislation, we're not going to put a dent in this fight until something like that stands up.
Right. So, what are the solutions till then? When before all these concrete things can happen, or whatever time it takes, what are the solutions that you think can bring down this big number, 50 suicides a day by veterans? How can you bring down those numbers? That is, I guess, a big immediate task for anyone if you look and understand it. What to do about this? What have you dealt in your book, A Date with Suicide?
So to answer your question, the most important thing is what you're doing right now, sir, is bringing me on and having this conversation with your viewers. Listen, I'm a veteran, and I spent almost 50 years plus refusing to talk about this. Why? Because nobody else would talk about it. And if I started to open my mouth, everybody would cringe. So the most important way we're going to start having an effect on the 50 veterans a day committing suicide is by you, sir, and all of your listeners stepping forward, hearing the conversation, and reading the book, if you will. Now, why do I say that? I'm not just pitching the book. People don't understand what's going on inside the mind of a veteran. You open this book and you will learn what's happening to our nation's warfighters. I walk it through in painful examples and detail of what it's like to be suffering the anxiety, the pain, the racing thoughts, the nightmares. So when civilians can begin to understand what we as veterans suffering from PTSD, mental health issues, are dealing with, that opens the conversation. From there, it will take its natural course and become destigmatized. So you folks, you, sir, and your listeners, you are the starting point. You're the most important factor.
Right, right, Doug. I saw that web series SEAL Team, and in that there was this character Swine, if I remember, and he took his life. And I don't know whether you have seen it, but it simply broke my heart the way they presented it. And as I said, truth is stranger than fiction. I
Right.
can I can actually understand what this thing is all about, and this must stop in whatever way. Especially, when people are ready to serve their nations with as much pride, ready to give lives, ready to be, when they are being told that you serve the nation and the nation will take care of you. You talked about that, civilians need to understand. I thought that a lot of people, especially in the US, do give a lot of respect to the people who have been in the armed forces. Why is it that it becomes difficult for them to understand these issues when it comes to understanding these issues?
Yeah, again, you're really hitting these questions exactly at the heart of the fight. To why? Your question is why. Ironically, in my book, I go after two questions. What happened to me and why? And I use that as a theme because I've heard so many other veterans say the same thing. What happened to me and why? So to use your example of a Navy SEAL, listen, I've talked to team members in the SEAL community, and they are just as susceptible to suicide as the rest of us. And it is brutally sad. Um, so I kind of lost train on your first part of your question, sir.
Yeah, that why is it that civilians who understand these things and have a lot of respect, that's what I have read, but why is it when it comes to mental health issues they are not able to understand? That you talked about, that a lot of civilians need to be educated about this, because see, this is, even this numbers, 50 suicide a day by veterans, means I'm shocked by any standards. If you look, because this, you are not talking about people who are fed up with life. It is about people who have served their nation with lot of pride, lot of integrity, lot of done doing whatever have been told during their job, and they cannot be left alone. They should never feel alone in whatever the life is after Navy, Army, Air Force, whatever it is. That's what I feel as an individual, as a civilian myself.
Yeah, two great points on that. First, I wrote an article titled "A Busload of Veterans," and it's in the foreword of my latest book, "A Date with Suicide," okay, by D. Paul Fleming. In that, it literally says if a bus crashes today on any highway you pick the country, listen, it's front page news, right? Now imagine a bus crashing today and killing 50 people. The whole world's going to say, oh my God, 50 people were killed. Well, what if that happens day after day after day after day, right? By the second bus crash, any government's going to unleash all of their forces. They're going to send the transportation department, the legal. They're going to search. They're going to want to know why. What the heck is going on, right? Is the rubber in the tires bad? Did they build bad engines? Okay. But if you say that busload is full of veterans, the conversation stops. Why? Because suicide is the next word. The gap between the civilian world and the military world, it's always been huge, and it is what it is. Okay. But what happens is people don't know how to say the next thing. If I tell somebody that I have had suicidal thoughts, they have no idea what to do next. So part of my mission is I'm trying to find the next great saying to parallel thank you for your service. Remember, pre 9/11, it wasn't a cool thing to be a veteran. Post Vietnam, it was very difficult. Post 9/11, the phrase thank you for your service became quote unquote common, normal, and everybody says it now. We need to coin a phrase that follows that sentence and opens the conversation to mental health. Now, how do you do it? Do you look at fellow veterans and say, hey, thank you for your service? By the way, are you suicidal? I don't know. It doesn't seem like a good fit, but I need your help finding those words. What are the right words so that we can find a path to destigmatizing mental health.
Right, right, Doug. Now, I want to understand about this thing is that, in terms of not trying to understand these six, the government, we understand, okay, there are issues. What about that? There are so many organizations, veterans organizations, other organizations, mental health organizations. You go on any place, they will, you talk about, even on Google or YouTube, you talk about a mental health issue, they will throw in a few numbers on your face that, listen, if you are feeling anything wrong, anything difficult, these numbers you can call, do these things. So many options they throw up. I
Yes.
want to understand that, is that not enough? Are those not organized, or those organizations not enough? Are they failing? Are they succeeding? The numbers don't show that they are succeeding. What is it that they are it's succeeding in? What is it that they are not able to do? Why is this number not coming down at all?
Yeah. So let me answer the last part of your question first. Okay. All of those organizations that are out there, and there's quite a few of them, they're all great. They're all doing their part. Mission 22, Be the One with American Legion. They're everywhere. The 50-mile rucksack, but they're pockets, and they're collectively in every state, in every nation for that matter. Okay. But there's no centralized force, right? There's no one place. And more importantly, sir, the topic of conversation never talks about suicide, the causes of suicide, the reasons we go down the path of suicide. Nobody's talking about what happens to a veteran when they transition, which is a key part of suicide, or trauma from time in the service. Or one of the things that I did was I went backwards and I wrote a book called 2,442 Steps to Crazy, which, by the way, did very well in India. But this book talks about my childhood and the abuse that I went through. Now, from my wildest dreams, I never thought people would want to read about, how I was terrorized and tortured as a child. But what I learned was I carried all of that into my military service. I carried all of that out of my military service. And it is a fundamental piece that took me down the path of wanting to kill myself. Now, all these other organizations are doing great work. They really are. But nobody is doing what, again, I don't want to toot my horn here, and I want to be careful how I say this. I believe that I'm putting my finger directly on the pulse of the causes, and I say that plural, of suicide. I've got 40 or 50 topics that are going to come out. This is book 1 in the series, but I picked the 4 topics: trauma, telling your story, what is a veteran, and why the why and what happened to me. Okay. Each one of those things has great stories, starting with my grandfather who stormed the beach in Normandy and never talked about it until he was, virtually in the grave. Why we don't talk about these things are addressed. So in my books, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put out there what we're dealing with that leads us to suicide. And now I'm trying to share it with everybody else, including all of those service organizations that are trying to get the message out there.
Right, right, Doug. Now let's look at it from the imperativeness of the whole global system that is there. Geopolitics, if you look, US's role is growing by the day. The way things are happening in Middle East, the way things are happening in Europe, the way things are happening in Taiwan and all these places, the way things are shaping up everywhere. Now, in that, I'm sure all these people understand the role of the armed forces in everything. And at the same time, if I understand, the young generation is not too interested in the armed forces as it was before. I did an interview a few months back with one of the persons from the armed forces, and he wrote a book that, something like that we don't want you, Uncle Sam. So that was the young generation talking about it. Now, if you look at it purely even from that part of the thing, you are actually leaving a big area unattended that the young generation does not want. And one of the reasons would be, to hear such stories And nobody wants to lead a life where they have to have ideas about suicide when they need them the most. They are not there. When the nation needs you, you are very much there all the time, even with your life. How do you look at this part, that even the commander in chief should look, either the present one or the next one? It could be this one or the new one.
Yeah. So again, that's a great topic. And it saddens my heart to watch what's going on. But that's kind of the thing. And you said it really well, that there's a gap in this generation. And I got to tell you, a lot of the guys who served are telling their children, don't go in. Don't go in. We serve, and we know that we're putting our lives on the line. We get it. Okay. When the reward for putting your life on the line is condescension, and you can't get help when you need it. Okay. I mean, it's a fight to get people into the VA. If you say I'm suicidal, the VA kind of looks at you and say, well, are you qualified? Okay. So knowing all of this and having these conversations from all of these, numbers of veterans organizations, who's left that wants to go in the military? Without getting into the geopolitics of it, I understand that, and I agree with what you're saying. But at the end of the day, if you're going to volunteer to put your life in front of everybody else, and you make that mental decision, and then you look around at the people who served before you, and they're kind of shaking their head and say, buckle up. It's not a good scenario. It's not a good scenario at all.
Absolutely. So, where do you see? Is there a respite to this? Or do you think unless a decision is taken at a federal level, this thing will not, these are all small steps that a big step has to be taken. Until then, these things will carry on. How do you see it going forward?
This is where my faith comes in. Okay. I refuse to quit. I refuse to give up. All right. And that's based on my faith. Okay. So I don't just believe that we're gonna make headway on this veteran suicide. I have to believe that I was called here by God to sit there and write these books, which is not easy. Okay. And to tell my story, which again is not easy, but I already know it's helping people. Just after the first book came out, I got a phone call from a guy I haven't seen in probably 30 years, guy I served with. And I learned when a veteran calls and says, I want to talk to you. Okay, you go. So I dropped what I was doing. We went, had some chicken wings, and we're standing there having a drink. And he looks at me and he goes, I read your book. I'm sorry about what happened to you. I kind of said it. Thank you. And then the next words out of his mouth were, I was all set to kill myself until I read your book. And that stopped me. Go back to what I said about my faith. Okay. I believe that God sent him through to me to give me more encouragement to get out here and do these podcasts and talk to everybody I can talk to. So yes, I have faith that we are going to solve this problem. We are going to get it under control, and we're going to stop the upward trajectory of these veteran suicides.
Right, Doug. So for those people who may, for whom the book may come up a bit later on, but suppose if someone listens to this episode,
right,
guys, and listens to what you are saying, what is it that you have talked there, so that any veteran who might be thinking of these sad things may find an immediate respite? How can they look for to tomorrow with a better hope, much more hope, so that they are able to look at some solution in the future?
Well, that's the great thing. If they're listening, then we're getting to them before they set that date with suicide. Okay, because that's the last step in the veterans plan. Okay, once they set that date, that's it. We're in trouble. Okay, so if people are listening to your show, then they're looking for answers, and that's where I say, in the article that I released and in the front of the book, it shows what's the starting point. Okay, now I give you 4 examples and the 2 questions. What happened to you and why? Start thinking about those questions and thinking about a starting point. For me, it was the decision to find peace. I said, I have got to find peace. I can't do this anymore. And that was my bottom line. From there, that one word, for me, it was peace. For others, it's, I don't want this anxiety anymore. And I've helped people manage their anxiety and get rid of it without all the medication that even I used to be on. But the starting point is know that you're not alone. We're in this fight with you. And always remember this. We are veterans. We've been through everything from boot camp to bombs to supply sergeants to doing deployments where you don't see any comment, but you're part of the machine. Okay. We've been through a lot. Now I'm challenging all of my veterans. We together can solve this problem. And here's the biggest takeaway. Because veteran suicide is so high, if you look at the civilian rate of suicide, it is screaming upwards. So I'm begging my fellow veterans, remember this. What we do as veterans, the civilian world will follow. Why? Well, if a veteran can't handle what he was up against, how am I supposed to handle it? It makes it easy for them to commit suicide. I don't want anybody to think this is a guilt trip. I want my fellow veterans to think this out, okay? We must attack this from our own community, stop killing ourselves, and in turn, the reward is not just helping people in the community live, but helping the private sector survive.
Absolutely, Doug. Absolutely. And each one involved with this, including the veteran himself or herself, must look at in as much hope as possible. And that will be, even not only in the US, but someone sitting in far away in India will also find much hope from all these, stories of hope and tomorrow, a better future.
Yeah, let me jump in there. These are great stories of hope. These are some of the most inspiring stories. They're gonna rip your insides apart. They're gonna put you on a roller coaster. Okay, there are so many people who have reached out and said, I couldn't put it down. I read it in one stop. Okay, but here's the other part. While we're talking about veterans, believe it or not, more civilians buy this book by a lot than veterans. The effect that this book is having on the families and the friends of veterans, because they're starting to understand what's happening to the veteran. Now they can relate. So once we start bridging that gap, you see, it's going to make the conversation of mental health and suicide that much easier because you're starting to get a sense of what they're going through. But the bottom line is these books that I wrote are as helpful or more helpful to family members than they are to veterans.
Absolutely. So for those people who want to learn more about your story, more about your book, what is the best way for them to do so, Doug?
So I really encourage you to go on Amazon and buy a copy of A Date with Suicide by D. Paul Fleming. Okay. If you want to know more, you can go to my website at dpaulfleming.com, or you can follow me on Facebook or on Twitter. All right, I've got a couple of handles on Twitter. One's D. Paul Fleming and the other one's Veterans Wellness. One is strictly about talking about the life without getting into politics or anything else. So, and I have access. I'm always telling people, listen, reach out to me. I'm happy to listen and I'm happy to hear your story. The most important thing I can tell you is encourage your fellow veterans to tell you their story. I get a lot of calls where people just want to say, I needed someone to vent to. All right. Well, it's not really venting when they're telling their story, because the more you tell your story, the harder it is to commit suicide.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on, sir.